The reward for 8 years of devotion was a public execution. Nurse Emily Harper had been the eyes and the anchor for Daniel Whitaker, the brilliant tech mogul who lost his sight after a devastating accident. She had sacrificed her youth to become his lifeline. But in the cold, sterile fortress of the Whitaker Innovations boardroom, before a jury of silent, tailored suits, her loyalty wasn't a virtue, it was a liability. All the power in the room rested with one person. Victoria, Daniel's sister, whose manicured finger was now aimed at her like a weapon. The venomous accusation hung in the air, poised to strike, and Emily's world was about to shatter with a single sentence. "You're nothing but a gold-digging nurse." Victoria Whitaker's voice sliced through the boardroom like a guillotine. Her manicured finger jabbed toward Emily Harper, who stood rigid at the edge of the polished mahogany table in Whitaker Innovations' Silicon Valley headquarters. The accusation hung in the air, venomous and deliberate, as the 12 board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Emily's jaw clenched, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the folder of Daniel Whitaker's medical reports. She'd faced condescension before, but this was a public execution. Victoria, Daniel's older sister and the company's CFO, paced the room, her heels clicking like gunfire. "You think you can worm your way into my brother's life, his company, his fortune? You're a caregiver, Emily, a nobody from Pittsburgh's slums. Stay in your lane." Her words dripped with disdain, each syllable a calculated strike to strip Emily of her dignity. The boardroom, usually a fortress of corporate strategy, had become a coliseum, and Emily was the gladiator without a sword. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Victoria cut her off. "Don't speak. You've been meddling in Daniel's decisions, whispering in his ear, acting like you belong here. You don't." The board members, men and women in tailored suits, their faces a mix of unease and agreement, remained silent, their loyalty to Victoria's influence palpable. Emily's heart pounded, her pulse a drumbeat of defiance, but she held her ground. She'd spent 8 years caring for Daniel, the blind tech mogul who'd built this empire, not just as his nurse, but as his confidant, his anchor. And now, this. "You're proposing we fire her?" Margaret Blackwell, a board member with a flicker of sympathy in her eyes, ventured cautiously. Victoria whirled, her gaze icy. "Exactly, she's a liability. Daniel's too dependent on her, and it's clouding his judgment. We need a professional, not some working-class opportunist." The word opportunist landed like a slap, and Emily's fingers twitched, itching to hurl the folder at Victoria's smug face. But she didn't. Not yet. The injustice burned. Emily had sacrificed her youth, her social life, her dreams, to care for Daniel after the lab explosion that stole his sight. She'd memorized his needs, from the exact temperature of his coffee to the rhythm of his breathing during sleepless nights. She'd taught herself coding basics to help him navigate his work, all while sending her salary home to her mother and sister in Pittsburgh. And now Victoria was painting her as a predator, leveraging Emily's lack of status to dismantle her life. "Daniel trusts me," Emily said, her voice low but steady, cutting through Victoria's tirade. The room stilled. Victoria's lips curled into a sneer. "Trust? You're paid to change his bandages, not play CEO. Don't delude yourself." The board members exchanged glances, some nodding faintly, their silence a betrayal. Emily's chest tightened, not with tears but with a fury that made her teeth ache. She wanted to scream that she'd been the one keeping Daniel grounded, keeping his genius alive while Victoria schemed behind his back. But words wouldn't sway this crowd. Not now. Victoria leaned forward, her voice a hiss. "You're done here, Emily. Pack your things. We'll find someone with actual credentials." The dismissal was final, a gavel strike in a kangaroo court. Emily's pulse roared in her ears, but she straightened her spine, refusing to crumble. She'd faced worse, growing up in a neighborhood where hope was a luxury, burying her father at 16, scraping by to put her sister through college. This was just another fight. The boardroom door loomed ahead, a portal to her uncertain future. Emily's hand tightened on the folder, her only shield. She'd leave, but not without a mark. Victoria's smug certainty would crack. Emily would make sure of it. As she stepped toward the door, her mind raced with the weight of 8 years, the secrets she and Daniel shared, and a faint glimmer of something new. A spark of defiance that would burn brighter than Victoria could ever imagine. Emily's hand froze on the boardroom door, her knuckles still white from clutching the folder of Daniel's medical reports. Victoria's venomous words, "Pack your things," echoed in her skull, each syllable a dagger aimed at her heart. The board members' silence screamed louder than any insult, their averted gazes branding her an outsider. But Emily Harper didn't break. Not here, not now. Her jaw locked tight, teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. She turned, facing Victoria, whose smirk radiated triumph, a queen certain of her checkmate. "You think you've won," Emily said, her voice a low, steady blade cutting through the room's tension. "You think you can erase 8 years of my life with a snap of your fingers. But you'll see, Victoria. Loyalty isn't bought with money or status. It's earned through sacrifice. And I've sacrificed more than you'll ever understand." Her words landed like a prophecy, heavy with unspoken promises of reckoning. The board members shifted, Margaret Blackwell's eyes widening slightly, but Victoria's sneer didn't waver. "Don't lecture me about sacrifice," Victoria snapped, stepping closer, her heels stabbing the floor. "You're a hired hand, nothing more. Save your speeches for the unemployment line." Emily's pulse surged, her fists itching to lash out, but she forced her hands to stay still. She wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Instead, she let her silence speak, a silence so potent it seemed to suck the air from the room. Her eyes locked onto Victoria's, unyielding, a mirror reflecting the CFO's cruelty back at her. Emily turned again, her movements deliberate, each step a defiance of the dismissal. She pushed open the heavy mahogany door, the Whitaker Innovations logo glaring at her like a mocking emblem of her exclusion. But as she stepped into the hallway, her heart pounded with resolve. She wouldn't slink away like a beaten dog. She'd go to Daniel, ensure his needs were met, as she'd done every day for 8 years. Not because it was her job, but because it was her purpose. In Daniel's office, she set the folder down with a quiet thud, her fingers trembling, not with fear, but with a fire that refused to die. She checked his schedule, adjusted his medication tray, and left a note in Braille. "I'm here if you need me." It was more than a message, it was a vow. As she exited the building, the Silicon Valley sun glared down, but Emily's mind was already racing ahead. Victoria thought she'd crushed her, but this was only the beginning. Emily's silence wasn't surrender. It was a storm gathering strength, ready to unleash a truth that would shake the foundations of Whitaker Innovations. Victoria Whitaker sat alone in her corner office, the Silicon Valley skyline sprawling beyond the glass walls, a kingdom she thought she'd secured. Her fingers tapped the desk, the echo of Emily's parting words. "Loyalty isn't bought with money or status," cutting deeper than she'd admit. Her smirk from the boardroom had faded, replaced by a tightness in her chest, a splinter of doubt wedged into her certainty. She'd won, hadn't she? Emily was gone, her influence over Daniel severed. Yet the victory felt hollow, like a deal closed on shaky terms. She opened her laptop, intent on drafting a memo to justify Emily's dismissal, when an email from Daniel caught her eye. Sent 2 years ago, buried in an archive folder, it was titled Emily Harper, Indispensable. Her breath hitched as she clicked it open. "Emily's not just my nurse," Daniel had written to the board. "She's my eyes, my strategist, my reason for pushing forward. Her judgment is sharper than most of you combined." The words stung, each one a rebuke to Victoria's accusations. Her fingers froze on the keyboard, her pulse quickening as guilt clawed its way up her spine. Had she misjudged Emily so completely? She slammed the laptop shut, her nails biting into her palms. "She's just a nurse," she muttered, but the words lacked conviction, crumbling under the weight of Daniel's praise. Emily had been at his side through every crisis, every sleepless night, while Victoria had been too busy plotting to notice. The realization twisted like a knife, her confidence unraveling. She'd called Emily an opportunist, but what if she was the one blinded by prejudice, seeing only a working-class woman instead of the pillar Daniel relied on? As she stood pacing to shake off the unease, her eyes caught a notification on her computer. A flagged file on Daniel's private server, labeled Lab Incident Report Restricted. Curiosity battled her guilt. She clicked, but the file was encrypted, its contents locked behind a password she didn't know. A single line in the metadata chilled her. Preliminary findings suggest equipment failure was preventable. Preventable? The lab explosion that blinded Daniel had been ruled an accident, a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Yet this file hinted at something darker, something hidden. Victoria's heart pounded, her mind racing. Had Emily known about this? Was that why she'd stayed so loyal, guarding secrets Victoria couldn't access? The thought gnawed at her, her earlier triumph now a shadow. She'd humiliated Emily, driven her out, but this file and Daniel's words suggested she'd underestimated the nurse's role in ways that could unravel her carefully laid plans. Her fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to call Emily back, to demand answers, but pride held her back. Instead, she stared at the locked file, its mystery a silent accusation. The office felt smaller now, the walls closing in as doubt replaced her smug certainty. Emily's prophetic silence in the boardroom echoed louder than ever, a warning that Victoria's actions had set something in motion, something she couldn't control. Outside, the Silicon Valley lights flickered, but all Victoria saw was the shadow of her mistake, growing larger with every unanswered question. "You think you can erase my daughter's 8 years with a sneer?" Emily's mother, Clara Harper, stood in the doorway of their cramped Pittsburgh apartment, her voice a whip crack that stopped Victoria Whitaker dead in her tracks. The CFO's tailored coat looked absurdly out of place against the peeling paint and faded linoleum of the working-class home. Clara's eyes, sharp as steel, bore into Victoria, her gnarled hands gripping the doorframe like she might slam it shut. Victoria's polished confidence faltered, her lips parting, but no words came. She'd come to make amends, but Clara's fury was a wall she hadn't expected. I came to apologize," Victoria stammered, her voice betraying a crack of unease. Clara's laugh was a harsh bark. "Apologize? You humiliated my Emily in front of your fancy board, calling her a gold digger for caring for your brother. You don't get to waltz in here and fix that with words." Victoria's fingers tightened around her purse, her knuckles whitening as the sting of Clara's rebuke hit harder than she'd braced for. The email from Daniel, praising Emily's indispensability, burned in her memory, a splinter of guilt that had driven her across the country to this doorstep. She'd underestimated Emily, and now Clara's defiance mirrored her daughter's, a mirror held up to Victoria's arrogance. "Where is she?" Victoria pressed, her voice sharper now, trying to reclaim control. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Working. At the hospital, where real people need her. Not your brother's mansion, where you think she's beneath you." The accusation landed like a punch, and Victoria's chest tightened, her breath hitching. She'd expected Emily to be broken, waiting for rescue, not thriving elsewhere. Clara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want her back? Prove you're worth her time." Victoria's pulse raced as she left the apartment, Clara's words searing her like a brand. She drove through Pittsburgh's gritty streets, her sleek rental car a stark contrast to the rusted pickups and weathered row houses. At Allegheny General Hospital, she found Emily's name on the staff roster, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. She'd come to right a wrong, but the weight of her mistake was heavier than she'd imagined. Emily wasn't just a nurse, she was a lifeline, and Victoria had cut it without a second thought. Inside the hospital, Victoria navigated the fluorescent-lit corridors, her heels clicking against the linoleum, drawing stares from overworked nurses. She spotted Emily in a bustling ward, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, her hands steady as she adjusted an IV for an elderly patient. Emily's face was a mask of focus, but her eyes held a fire that Victoria hadn't noticed in the boardroom. She was no victim. She was a force moving with purpose, her every action a rebuke to Victoria's assumptions. Victoria's throat tightened, her earlier certainty crumbling. How had she misread this woman so completely? "Emily," Victoria called, her voice cutting through the ward's hum. Emily turned, her expression hardening as she saw Victoria. She didn't speak, just raised an eyebrow, her silence a challenge. Victoria's fingers twitched, itching to retreat, but she forced herself forward. "I was wrong," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I shouldn't have said those things in the boardroom. I need you to come back. Daniel needs you." Emily's jaw clenched, her hands pausing on the IV stand. "You think an apology undoes what you did? You called me a leech in front of everyone who matters to him." Victoria flinched, her nails digging into her palms. "I know. I saw Daniel's email. He trusts you more than anyone. I misjudged you." Emily's eyes flickered, a storm of anger and hurt swirling within them. "You misjudged me because I'm not like you. I don't have your money, your name. But I've kept Daniel alive, kept his mind sharp, for 8 years. You don't get to decide my worth." The words hit like a slap, and Victoria's face burned, her pride warring with the guilt that had driven her here. Emily turned back to her patient, her movements precise but tense, as if holding back a tidal wave of rage. "If Daniel wants me back, he'll ask me himself," she said, her voice low, final. Victoria stood frozen, her heart hammering. She'd expected tears, pleading, not this unyielding strength. As Emily walked away, her scrubs swishing with purpose, Victoria's gaze fell on a hospital bulletin board. A faded flyer mentioned a Whitaker Innovations grant for vision research, signed by Daniel. It was a reminder of his brilliance and Emily's role in preserving it. Victoria's guilt deepened, a chasm she couldn't bridge alone. She'd humiliated Emily, but the nurse's absence was a wound that would bleed through Daniel's empire and Victoria's conscience until she made this right. As she stepped into the hospital's parking lot, the weight of her mission pressed harder. Emily wasn't just a caregiver. She was a cornerstone, and Victoria had tried to tear her down. The encrypted file from Daniel's server, lab incident report, flashed in her mind, its mystery a nagging shadow. Something bigger was at play, and Emily might hold the key. Victoria's resolve hardened, her heels digging into the asphalt as she vowed to bring Emily back. Not just for Daniel, but to face the truth she'd ignored for too long. Emily Harper's sneakers squeaked against the hospital linoleum as she knelt beside a young girl's bed, her hands steady as she adjusted the child's oxygen mask. The ward at Allegheny General buzzed with the chaos of a late-night shift, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps. But Emily was a calm anchor, her focus unbreakable. Her scrubs clung to her sweat-dampened back, the weight of a 12-hour shift pressing down, but her eyes burned with purpose. Victoria's humiliation in the boardroom still stung, a bruise on her pride. But here, in this world of patience and pain, Emily was unshakable. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a lifeline, and no one, not even a Whitaker, could take that from her. "Miss Emily, will I see my mom's face again?" the girl, Lily, whispered, her voice fragile, her eyes clouded by cataracts. Emily's chest tightened, her fingers pausing on the mask. She forced a smile, her voice soft but firm. "We're fighting for that, sweetheart. Dr. Nguyen's working hard, and I'm right here with you." Lily's small hand gripped hers, and Emily squeezed back, her resolve hardening. This was why she'd endured 8 years of caring for Daniel Whitaker, why she'd studied late into the night to understand his blindness, why she'd pushed him through secret stem cell therapy trials. It wasn't just for him, it was for kids like Lily, for anyone who needed hope when the world turned dark. She stood, her knees cracking, and caught her reflection in a nearby monitor. Her face was drawn, her braid fraying, but her eyes held a fire that Victoria's words couldn't extinguish. She'd been Daniel's eyes for 8 years, reading his emails, guiding his hand through contracts, whispering encouragement when despair threatened to swallow him. And now in secret, she'd been his partner in a daring experiment, a stem cell treatment that had begun to spark faint glimmers in his sight. Shadows, light, the outline of her face. He described it to her last week, his voice trembling with awe. She'd kept it hidden, not just from Victoria, but from the world, protecting his hope from the skeptics who'd crushed it before. At the nurse's station, her coworker Jamal handed her a lukewarm coffee. "You're a machine, Harper," he said, his tone half admiring, half concerned. "You've been here since dawn, and you're still going. What's driving you?" Emily's lips twitched, a half smile masking the storm inside. "Someone's got to keep the lights on for my sister's college tuition," she said, deflecting. But her mind flashed to Daniel, to the way his hand had grazed hers during their last therapy session, his voice low as he said, "You make me believe I can see again." That moment had shifted something in her, a spark she didn't dare name, but it fueled her now, pushing her through exhaustion. She glanced at Lily's chart, her fingers tracing the notes on vision therapy. Her own studies, dog-eared medical journals, late-night webinars, had taught her more than her nursing degree ever could. She'd learned about neuroplasticity, about the brain's ability to rewire itself, and applied it to Daniel's care. Every small victory, his ability to sense light, to track movement, felt like her own. But Victoria's accusation had cut deep, branding her a schemer when all she'd done was believe in a man everyone else had written off. Her jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she shoved the anger down. She wouldn't let Victoria's cruelty define her. As she prepared to check on another patient, Jamal nudged her. "You heard about the Whitaker grant? Vision research, big money. Your guy's name's on it." Emily's heart skipped. Daniel's grant, one she'd helped him draft, was funding trials like the one saving him. It was proof of his brilliance, proof she'd been right to fight for him. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup, her resolve steeling. She wasn't done, not with Daniel, not with herself. Victoria could try to tear her down, but Emily Harper was building something bigger, something that would outlast the CFO's venom. She stepped back into the ward, her sneakers steady, her heart a furnace of determination. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, Daniel was waiting, and she'd be damned if she let him face his darkness alone. As she moved to Lily's side, checking her chart with a fierce focus, a single thought burned bright. She'd bring light back to those who needed it most, starting with the man who'd changed her world. "You don't get to walk in here and erase what you did." Emily Harper's voice cut through the hospital ward's hum, sharp as a scalpel, as she faced Victoria Whitaker. Her hands gripped a patient chart, knuckles white, her eyes blazing with a fury that had simmered since the boardroom humiliation. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows, but Emily stood unyieldingly, her scrubs wrinkled from a relentless shift at Allegheny General. Victoria, in her pristine Chanel coat, looked like an intruder in this world of grit and grace, her earlier confidence now a fragile mask. "I'm here to make this right," Victoria said, her voice tight, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. The apology she'd rehearsed in her head felt flimsy now, dwarfed by Emily's righteous anger. She'd crossed the country, driven by the sting of Daniel's email and the cryptic lab incident report file, but Clara Harper's rebuke and Emily's strength had rattled her. "I was wrong to call you a gold digger. I saw Daniel's email. You're vital to him." The admission burned her throat, each word a surrender of her pride. Emily's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she set the chart down with a deliberate thud. "Vital? You didn't think so when you tore me apart in front of your board. You called me a leech, Victoria. You think a few words fix that?" Her voice was low, a controlled storm, each syllable slicing through Victoria's defenses. The ward's chaos, nurses rushing, monitors beeping, faded as Emily stepped closer, her presence commanding. "I've carried Daniel through 8 years of darkness. I've studied his condition, learned his world, and kept him fighting. You don't get to waltz in and claim you understand." Victoria's chest tightened, her nails digging into her palms. "I know I misjudged you," she said, her voice cracking. "Daniel's floundering without you. The board is questioning his leadership, and I made it worse." Her eyes flickered with something raw, guilt, maybe fear. "Come back, please. He needs you." Emily's lips twitched, a bitter half-smile. "You don't get to decide what Daniel needs. He does." She turned, ready to walk away, her sneakers poised to carry her back to her patients, to the life she'd reclaim. But Victoria grabbed her arm, her grip desperate. "Wait, I'll make it right with the board. I'll admit I was wrong publicly. Just help him." Emily froze. Victoria's touch a spark that reignited her anger. She yanked her arm free, her eyes narrowing. You want me back? Prove it. Support Daniel's leadership? No more games? And find out what really happened in that lab explosion? Something's not right, and I think you know it. Her words were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at Victoria's feet. Victoria's breath caught, the mention of the explosion hitting like a punch. The encrypted file flashed in her mind, its ominous hint that the incident was preventable. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I'll look into it, I swear. Emily's gaze held hers, searching for sincerity, then softened slightly, a flicker of trust breaking through her fury. Fine. I'll come back when Daniel asks. Not before. Her tone was final, a line drawn in the sand. As Emily turned to check on a patient, her hand brushed against a small box in her pocket. Daniel's belongings, left behind when she'd cleared out her staff quarters. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a USB drive, its label faded but legible. Whitaker Lab Backup, 2017. Her heart skipped, her pulse racing as she realized it might hold answers about the explosion that blinded Daniel. She slipped it back into her pocket, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about her and Daniel. It was about truth, about justice. Victoria watched, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. Emily's demand to investigate the explosion echoed the mystery of the encrypted file, and the weight of her own complicity pressed harder. She'd come to apologize, but now she was entangled in something bigger, something that could unravel her family's empire. I'll do it, she said, more to herself than Emily, her voice firming with purpose. I'll find out what happened. Emily didn't respond. Her focus was back on her patient, but her silence carried a weight that Victoria felt in her bones. As Victoria turned to leave, her heels clicking against the linoleum, she knew this was only the beginning. The USB drive in Emily's pocket was a ticking bomb, its secrets waiting to detonate. And Victoria, for the first time, feared she wasn't ready for the fallout. She stepped into the hospital corridor, her shadow stretching long, a reminder that the truth, whatever it was, would demand a reckoning. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Harold Grayson's voice was a low growl, his wiry frame looming over Emily Harper in the dim corridor of Whitaker Innovations' legal department. His eyes, sharp and cold as a hawk's, pinned her in place, his thin lips curling into a sneer. Emily's pulse hammered, her fingers tightening around the USB drive in her pocket, the one labeled Whitaker Lab Backup, 2017, she'd found among Daniel's belongings. She'd come to the office to retrieve Daniel's latest medical files, but Harold, the Whitaker family's longtime lawyer, had cornered her like a predator scenting blood. You think you're clever, don't you? Harold snapped, stepping closer, his polished shoes clicking menacingly on the tile. Snooping around, whispering in Daniel's ear, playing hero. You're a nurse, not a detective. Stay out of things that don't concern you. Emily's jaw locked, her teeth grinding as she fought the urge to shove past him. She'd faced Victoria's venom, but Harold's threat was different. Raw, dangerous, like a blade pressed to her throat. Her heart pounded, but she stood her ground, her sneakers rooted to the floor. I'm here for Daniel's files, she said, her voice steady, cutting through his tirade. Not your secrets. Harold's eyes narrowed, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. Secrets? You have no idea what you're stirring up. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into her skin, sending a jolt of pain up her arm. Emily yanked free, her chest heaving, fury blazing in her eyes. Let go of me, or I'll scream this place down. Her words were a whip, sharp and unyielding, but Harold's smirk only deepened, a predator unfazed by prey. You scream and I'll make sure you lose everything, he hissed, leaning in so close she could smell his stale cologne. Your job, your reputation, your precious little family in Pittsburgh. I know about your sister's tuition, your mother's debts. One word from me, and it's gone. The threat landed like a punch, Emily's breath catching as her mind flashed to her sister. Lily's college dreams, her mother's fragile health. Harold knew too much. His words were a calculated strike at her vulnerabilities. Her fingers twitched around the USB drive, its weight a silent reminder of the truth she was chasing. Victoria appeared at the corridor's end, her heels clicking as she froze, catching the tail end of Harold's threat. "Harold, what's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp but laced with unease. Harold spun, his composure slipping for a split second before his smirk returned. "Just warning our nurse not to meddle in company business," he said, his tone oily, dismissive. Victoria's eyes darted to Emily. Her guilt from their hospital confrontation still did not equal sign flicker in her gaze. "Emily, are you okay?" she asked, stepping forward, her hands clenched into fists. "I'm fine," Emily snapped, her voice ablade, her wrist still stinging from Harold's grip. "But you're hiding something, and I'm not afraid of you." Her defiance was a fire, burning through her fear, her eyes locking onto Harold's with a challenge. He chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You're out of your depth, girl. Keep pushing, and you'll drown." He turned, striding away, his shadow long and threatening, leaving Emily's heart racing with a mix of rage and dread. Victoria's face paled, her fingers trembling as she adjusted her purse strap. "Emily, what was that about?" she asked, her voice low, uncertain. Emily's hand tightened around the USB drive, her resolve hardening. "He's scared," she said, her voice low but firm. "That means we're close to something big." Victoria's eyes widened, the encrypted file from Daniel's server flashing in her mind, a hint that the lab explosion was preventable. Emily's defiance was a spark, igniting Victoria's doubt about Harold's loyalty. Emily's sneakers squeaked as she turned to leave, her mind racing. Harold's threat wasn't just personal, it was a shield for something darker, something tied to the explosion that stole Daniel's sight. The USB drive in her pocket felt heavier, its secrets a ticking bomb. She'd faced Victoria's scorn and won. Now Harold was a new enemy, one with sharper claws. As she stepped into the elevator, her hand closed protectively over the drive, her heart a furnace of determination. Whatever Harold was hiding, she'd uncover it, no matter the cost. The doors closed, sealing her in with the weight of a truth that could shatter Whitaker Innovations and everyone in it. "You're poking a hornet's nest, Emily," Sarah Kim's voice hissed through the dim glow of her laptop screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard in her cramped Silicon Valley apartment. Emily Harper leaned over her shoulder, her pulse hammering, her hand clutching the USB drive labeled Whitaker Lab Backup 2017. Harold Grayson's threat still burned in her ears. His words, "You'll regret it." A blade pressed to her resolve, but Emily's jaw was set, her teeth grinding as she stared at the encrypted files Sarah was cracking. She wasn't backing down, not when the truth about Daniel Whitaker's blindness was within reach. "Keep going," Emily said, her voice a low command, her sneakers scuffing the hardwood as she paced. Sarah, Daniel's trusted engineer and a coding genius, shot her a wary glance. "This could get us fired, or worse." Her hands paused, hovering over the keys. Emily's eyes flashed, her fists clenching. "Worse is letting Harold bury what happened to Daniel. That explosion wasn't an accident. You saw the metadata." Sarah's lips tightened, but she nodded, diving back into the code, her fingers a blur as she bypassed the file's security. The screen flickered, revealing a partial report. "Lab equipment failure, ignored safety protocols." Emily's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs. The document detailed faulty wiring in the lab's experimental reactor, flagged months before the explosion that blinded Daniel. A memo buried in the file bore Harold's signature, dismissing the warnings to cut costs for Project Helix. Emily's fingers dug into her palms, her nails biting skin. "He knew," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "He let it happen." Sarah clicked deeper, uncovering an email chain between Harold and a rival firm, Nexus Tech. "Look at this," she said, her voice tight. "Harold was funneling funds to Nexus for a side deal. They paid him to rush Project Helix. No questions asked." Emily's chest heaved, her anger a wildfire. Harold's greed had cost Daniel his sight, his life, his empire's trust. Her mind flashed to Daniel, to the way he'd squinted at her last week, his voice soft as he said, "I saw a shadow today, Emily, because of you." His vision was returning, a miracle born of their secret stem cell trials, and now she knew it was no accident that had taken it away. We need more, Emily said, her voice steel, her hand slamming the table. This isn't enough to nail him. Sarah's eyes widened, but she nodded, pulling up server logs from Whitaker Innovations archives. If Harold covered this up, there'll be a trail. Financials, timestamps, something. Her fingers danced, pulling data fragments like threads from a tapestry. Emily paced, her sneakers wearing a groove in the floor, her mind racing. She'd faced Harold's threats, Victoria's scorn, but this was bigger, a conspiracy that could topple the Whitaker empire. A new file loaded, a transfer log showing $2 million moved to an offshore account under Harold's name, dated days after the explosion. Emily's heart leapt, her fingers twitching to grab the screen. That's it, she said, her voice ablade. He was paid to stay quiet. Sarah's hands froze, her face paling. Emily, this is dynamite. If we take this to Daniel, Harold's done. But he's dangerous. You saw him in that corridor. Emily's jaw clenched, her teeth aching from the pressure. I'm not afraid of him. Daniel deserves the truth. She grabbed her phone, dialing Daniel's number, her fingers trembling with urgency. Emily! His voice was groggy, but the hope in it, sparked by his improving vision, lit a fire in her chest. I found something, she said, her words sharp, urgent. The explosion. It wasn't an accident. Harold knew the equipment was faulty. He covered it up for money. Silence stretched. Then Daniel's voice, low and fierce. Get to my office, now. Emily's heart pounded, her resolve hardening. She hung up, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. Copy everything. We're taking this to him. Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering. If Harold finds out, he'll come for us. Emily's hand shot out, gripping Sarah's shoulder. He already has. We're not stopping. Sarah nodded, her hands flying again, downloading the files to a secure drive. Emily's mind raced to Daniel, to the therapy sessions where she'd held his hand, guiding him through darkness. Last night, he traced her face with his fingers, his voice breaking. I saw your outline, Emily. It's coming back. Her throat tightened, not with fear, but with a fierce need to protect him, to expose the betrayal that had stolen his sight. As they worked, a new email popped up, an old message from Harold to an unknown recipient, dated the day of the explosion. Project Helix is secure. No one will trace it back. Emily's breath hitched, her fingers curling into fists. The puzzle was coming together, each piece a nail in Harold's coffin. But Sarah's voice cut through. There's a gap. The server logs are incomplete. Someone wiped the final transaction. Emily's heart sank, her nails digging deeper into her palms. They were close, but not close enough. She grabbed the USB drive, slipping it into her pocket, its weight a promise of justice. We'll find the rest, she said, her voice a vow. Harold's not getting away with this. Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp with determination. I'll keep digging. There's a backup server in the old lab. If it's there, I'll find it. Emily's sneakers hit the floor, her stride purposeful as she headed for the door. Daniel was waiting, and she'd bring him the truth, piece by piece. As she stepped into the night, her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Found something on the lab server. Meet me tomorrow. Emily's pulse spiked, her hand tightening around the USB drive. Victoria was on their side, or so she claimed. But Harold's shadow loomed larger now, his threats a noose tightening around them. Emily's heart thundered, her resolve a steel rod in her spine. The truth was close, but so was danger. She'd face it head on for Daniel, for herself, for the justice they both deserved. As she strode toward her car, the USB drive burned in her pocket, a beacon of secrets ready to ignite. You sold him out for a paycheck! Emily Harper's voice was a razor slicing through the tense silence of Daniel Whitaker's office. Her hands slammed the USB drive onto his desk, the clatter echoing like a gunshot. Daniel, his eyes still adjusting to the faint outlines of light from his stem cell therapy, flinched at the sound, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. Emily's chest heaved, her pulse a war drum as she stared at the screen where Sarah Kim had just played an audio file, a damning confession from Harold Grayson, the family lawyer who'd betrayed them all. Play it again, Daniel said, his voice low, a growl of barely contained fury. Sarah, her fingers trembling, clicked the file. Harold's voice crackled through the speakers, smug and cold. The reactor was a risk, but Nexus paid well. No one will trace it. Project Helix is secure. Emily's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. The audio, buried in the USB drive's encrypted depths, confirmed what she'd feared. Harold had known the lab equipment was faulty, ignored the warnings for a $2 million payoff from a rival firm, and let the explosion blind Daniel to protect his deal. Her fists balled, nails biting into her palms, the betrayal of fire in her veins. Daniel's face hardened, his hands shaking as he leaned forward. "He did this to me," he whispered, his voice breaking. Not with weakness, but with a rage that made Emily's heart ache. She'd seen him at his lowest. Nights when despair had crushed him, when he'd whispered, "I'll never see again." She'd held his hand through those moments, guiding him through darkness, and now the truth was a blade twisting in them both. Harold's greed had stolen Daniel's sight, his freedom, his trust. And Victoria, his sister, had trusted Harold, enabling the cover-up with her silence. "It's worse," Sarah said, her voice tight as she pulled up another file. A contract between Harold and Nexus Tech, time-stamped days before the explosion. He didn't just ignore the warnings. He sabotaged the safety checks to rush the project. Your blindness was collateral damage. Emily's breath caught, her fingers twitching to smash the screen. She'd spent 8 years rebuilding Daniel's hope, and now she knew it was Harold's betrayal, not fate, that had shattered it. Her eyes burned not with tears, but with a fury that demanded justice. Daniel stood, his movements unsteady but deliberate, his newly restored vision catching glints of Emily's outline. "He thought I'd stay broken," he said, his voice a low thunder. "He thought he could bury this." Emily stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, a silent anchor. "He can't bury it now," she said, her voice steel. "We have the audio, the contract, the money trail. He's done." Her words were a vow, her heart pounding with the weight of what they'd uncovered. Harold's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a crime that had rippled through Whitaker Innovations, endangering lives for profit. Victoria's absence in this moment loomed large. Emily's mind flashed to their hospital confrontation, to Victoria's promise to investigate the explosion. Had she known about Harold's role? Was she complicit or just another pawn? Emily's fingers tightened around the USB drive, now back in her pocket, its weight a burning reminder of the fight ahead. "We need to tell Victoria," she said, her voice firm but edged with doubt. "She's part of this, whether she admits it or not." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes glinting with a mix of pain and determination. "We'll confront them all. Harold, the board, anyone who let this happen." His hand found hers, his grip fierce, grounding them both. Emily's pulse steadied, her resolve a steel rod in her spine. They'd uncovered a truth that could shatter the company, but it could also free Daniel from the shadows of betrayal. As Sarah copied the files to a secure drive, Emily's eyes locked onto Daniel's, seeing the man she'd fought for, the man who was fighting back. The office door stood closed, but beyond it, Harold's shadow waited, his threats a noose tightening. Emily's hand squeezed Daniel's, her heart a furnace of defiance. The truth was out, but the battle was just beginning. As they prepared to face the board, the USB drive burned in her pocket, a weapon forged in secrets, ready to bring down those who dared to break them. "You're a fool if you think you can ruin me." Harold Grayson's voice was a venomous snarl, his wiry frame blocking the door to his office in Whitaker Innovations' legal wing. Emily Harper stood defiant, her hand clutching the USB drive, its damning audio of Harold's confession burning in her pocket like a live coal. Her pulse thundered, her jaw locked so tight her teeth ached. She'd come to confront him with the truth, that he'd sabotaged the lab, blinded Daniel Whitaker for profit. But Harold's eyes gleamed with a predator's menace, his thin lips twisting into a sneer that promised violence. "You heard the audio," Emily said, her voice a blade, sharp and unyielding. "You ignored the safety warnings, took Nexus Tech's money, and let that explosion happen. Daniel's blindness is on you." Her words were a whip, lashing out as she stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Harold's hand shot out, slamming the door shut behind him, the lock clicking with a finality that sent a chill down her spine. You're out of your league, nurse, he hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot with stale coffee and desperation. That USB won't see the light of day. Emily's heart pounded, her fingers tightening around the drive. It's over, Harold. We have the contract, the money trail. You're done. Her defiance was a fire, burning through the fear clawing at her chest. Harold's smirk vanished, his hand grabbing her wrist, twisting hard enough to make her gasp. Give it to me, he growled, his grip a vice, his nails digging into her skin. Emily yanked back, her free hand shoving at his chest. But he was stronger, pushing her against the desk, papers scattering like leaves in a storm. You think you're a hero? He spat, his voice a low snarl. You're nothing. A nobody from Pittsburgh who got too close to a billionaire? Her knees hit the desk's edge, pain shooting through her legs. But Emily's eyes blazed, her fury a furnace. I'm the nobody who's going to bury you, she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her wrist. She twisted, trying to break free, but Harold shoved her harder, pinning her against the desk, his hand fumbling for the USB in her pocket. Her heart raced, her mind flashing to Daniel, his faint vision returning, his trust in her unwavering. She couldn't let Harold win, not after 8 years of fighting for Daniel's hope. Stop! Victoria Whitaker's voice cracked through the room like a gunshot, her heels storming in as she pushed the door open. Unlocked in Harold's haste, her face was pale, her fists clenched, the encrypted file's hint of sabotage still haunting her. Let her go, Harold, she barked, her voice trembling with rage and betrayal. Harold froze, his grip loosening, but his eyes darted between the women, calculating. Victoria, this doesn't concern you, he snapped, his voice oily, desperate. She's trying to ruin us all with lies. Emily seized the moment, wrenching her wrist free, her hand diving into her pocket to protect the USB. Lies, she said, her voice ablade. Your voice is on that audio, admitting you sold Daniel out. Victoria's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as the truth hit her. You knew about the explosion? She whispered, her voice breaking, her trust in Harold shattering like glass. Harold's face twisted, his composure cracking. You don't understand the stakes, he shouted, lunging toward Emily again, his hand aiming for the USB. She dodged, stumbling toward the window, her back against the glass, her heart pounding like a war drum. The drop to the Silicon Valley streets loomed below, a dizzying reminder of the danger she'd walked into. Enough! Daniel's voice roared from the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his eyes, now seeing faint shapes, locked onto Harold with a fury that made the room still. He'd sensed Emily's absence, followed her trail, his improving vision guiding him like a beacon. Step away from her, Harold, he said, his voice low, lethal, his hands clenched into fists. Harold froze, his sneer faltering as Daniel advanced, his steps unsteady but resolute, his presence a storm breaking over the room. Emily's breath caught, her hand tightening around the USB, her heart swelling with relief and fear. Harold's eyes darted to the door, then back to Emily, his desperation a cornered animal's. You can't prove anything, he hissed, but his voice wavered, his hands shaking. Emily stood taller, her sneakers planted firm, her voice cutting through his panic. We already have. The audio, the contract, the money. You're finished. Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing Emily's arm, grounding her, his gaze burning into Harold. You took my sight, he said, his voice a quiet thunder. You won't take her. The room pulsed with tension, the USB drive in Emily's hand a ticking bomb. Harold's shadow loomed, but Daniel's presence was a shield, his restored vision a weapon. Emily's heart thundered, her resolve unbreakable. They'd exposed Harold's betrayal, but the fight wasn't over. As Daniel's hand tightened around hers, the danger hung heavy, a storm ready to break, and Emily knew the next move would either save them or destroy everything. You can't hide forever, Harold. Emily Harper's voice was a steel blade, cutting through the tense air of Daniel Whitaker's office as she clutched the USB drive, its weight a burning vow of justice. Her wrist still throbbed from Harold Grayson's grip, the memory of his attack fueling her fury. Daniel stood beside her, his newly restored vision sharpening, his eyes catching her outline with a clarity that made her heart race. Harold had fled the confrontation, his threats lingering like a noose. But Emily's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she refused to let fear win. They needed the final piece of evidence to bury him, and she'd tear Whitaker Innovations apart to find it. "We're close," Daniel said, his voice low, a growl of determination as he gripped her hand, his fingers steadying her trembling ones. "He's desperate. That means he's slipping." His eyes, once clouded by blindness, now glinted with a fire that matched her own. Emily nodded, her sneakers scuffing the floor as she turned to Sarah Kim, who was already hunched over her laptop, her fingers a blur. "The server logs are incomplete," Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency. "But there's a backup in the old lab. If Harold wiped anything, it'll be there." Emily's pulse surged, her hand slamming the desk. "Then we go. Now." They moved fast, slipping through Whitaker Innovations' dimly lit corridors, the Silicon Valley night pressing against the glass walls. Emily's heart pounded, her mind racing with the audio file's damning confession. Harold's voice admitting he'd ignored safety warnings for a Nexus Tech payoff. But they needed more, something ironclad to seal his fate. Daniel led the way, his steps steadier than ever, his vision catching shapes and shadows, a miracle born of their secret stem cell trials. Emily's chest tightened, not with fear but with a fierce pride. She'd fought for his hope, and now they'd fight for truth together. The old lab, tucked in the building's basement, was a maze of dusty equipment and forgotten files, a ghost of the explosion that had blinded Daniel. Sarah hacked into the backup server, her hands shaking as she bypassed security protocols. "This is it," she whispered, her screen glowing with a log file dated the day of the explosion. Emily leaned in, her breath catching as the data loaded. A detailed transaction record showing Harold's final payment to Nexus Tech, time-stamped hours after the blast. $500,000, Sarah read, her voice trembling. "He was paid to keep quiet after the explosion. This ties him to the cover-up." Emily's fist balled, her nails biting into her palms. "That's the nail in his coffin," she said, her voice a vow. But Sarah's fingers froze, her eyes widening. "There's more. A maintenance log. The reactor's wiring was flagged as critical 3 days before the explosion. Harold signed off on bypassing the repair." Emily's heart slammed against her ribs, her fury a wildfire. Harold hadn't just ignored warnings. He'd actively sabotaged the lab, ensuring the explosion to secure his deal. Daniel's hand gripped her shoulder, his voice a low thunder. "He stole my site for money. He's done." Sarah copied the files to a secure drive, her hands moving with desperate speed. "We've got everything," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "The audio, the contract, this log. He can't deny it." Emily's eyes locked onto Daniel's, his face now clear in her vision, no longer a blur. "We take this to the board," she said, her voice steel. "Tomorrow. We end this." Daniel nodded, his grip tightening, his eyes burning with a resolve that mirrored hers. "Together," he said, his voice a promise, his hand brushing hers, grounding them both. But a noise, a sharp clatter from the lab's entrance, made Emily's heart lurch. She spun, her sneakers squeaking, her hand diving into her pocket to protect the USB. "Someone's here," Sarah whispered, her fingers fumbling to eject the drive. Emily's pulse roared, her mind flashing to Harold's threats, his oily smirk. Had he followed them? The door creaked, and Victoria Whitaker stepped in, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder. "I found something," she said, her voice low, urgent. "Server logs from the main office. They match your USB. Harold's been deleting evidence." Emily's eyes narrowed, her trust in Victoria fragile after the boardroom betrayal. "Why are you here?" she snapped, her voice a blade. Victoria's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the folder. "I was wrong about you, and about Harold. He's been lying to me for years." She handed Emily the folder, her hands shaking. Inside were printed emails, Harold instructing an assistant to shred documents post-explosion. Emily's heart leapt, her fingers tracing the words, each one a bullet for their case. "You're with us?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp, his eyes searching Victoria's. She nodded, her face etched with guilt. "I trusted him. I was blind too." Emily's chest tightened, her anger warring with a flicker of empathy. Victoria's betrayal had hurt, but her remorse was real, and these emails were gold. "We've got enough," Emily said, her voice firm, her hand closing around the USB and folder. "Harold's going down." Sarah ejected the drive, slipping it into Emily's hand, its weight a final weapon. "We need to move," she said, her voice tense. "If Harold knows we're here, he'll try to stop us." Emily's sneakers hit the floor, her stride purposeful as they headed for the exit. Daniel's hand brushed hers, his presence a shield, his vision a beacon. The lab's shadows loomed, but Emily's resolve was brighter, her heart a furnace of justice. They had the evidence: audio, contracts, logs, emails, everything to bury Harold. But as they stepped into the corridor, a faint sound echoed behind them, like footsteps trailing in the dark. Emily's hand tightened around the drive, her pulse a war drum. The truth was theirs, but the danger was closer than ever, a predator stalking their every move. "You're a traitor, Harold," Daniel Whitaker's voice thundered through the Whitaker Innovations boardroom, his eyes, now sharp with restored vision, locked onto Harold Grayson like a hunter sighting prey. The USB drive clutched in Emily Harper's hand burned with the weight of truth. Audio, contracts, server logs, and emails proving Harold's sabotage of the lab explosion that had blinded Daniel. Emily stood beside him, her sneakers planted firm, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. The board members, 12 faces frozen in shock, stared as Daniel, once confined to darkness, strode to the head of the mahogany table, his presence a storm breaking over the room. "You can't prove a thing," Harold snapped, his wiry frame leaping from his chair, his voice a desperate hiss. His thin lips twisted, his hands slamming the table, scattering papers. "This is a witch hunt, Daniel. You're delusional." But his eyes darted to Emily, to the USB drive, betraying his panic. Emily's pulse roared, her fingers tightening around the drive, her fury a wildfire. 8 years she'd cared for Daniel, fought for his hope, and now Harold's betrayal was laid bare. A $2 million deal with Nexus Tech to ignore safety warnings, causing the explosion that stole Daniel's sight. "Play it," Daniel said, his voice low, lethal, his hand brushing Emily's for strength. Sarah Kim, at the boardroom's laptop, clicked the audio file. Harold's voice crackled through the speakers, smug and damning. "The reactor was a risk, but Nexus paid well. No one will trace it." Gasps erupted, Margaret Blackwell's hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Harold's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he gripped the table's edge. "That's fabricated," he shouted, his voice cracking. But Emily stepped forward, her voice ablade. "Fabricated? We have the contract, the money trail, and the server logs. You sold Daniel out for cash." Victoria Whitaker, standing near the boardroom's edge, clutched the folder of emails she'd found. Harold's orders to shred evidence post-explosion. Her face was ashen, her hands shaking as she spoke, her voice a broken whisper. "You lied to me, Harold, for years." She slammed the folder onto the table, her guilt and rage colliding. "You let my brother suffer to line your pockets." Harold's eyes darted between them, his smirk gone, replaced by a cornered animal snarl. "You don't understand the stakes," he spat, his finger jabbing at Daniel. "You were weak, blind, useless." Daniel's fist clenched, his knuckles whitening, but his voice was ice. "Weak? I built this company while you schemed in the shadows." He turned to the board, his gaze commanding, his restored vision a weapon. "This man caused the explosion that blinded me. He took my sight, endangered lives, all for a payoff, and he thought he could bury it." He nodded to Sarah, who projected the server logs and contract, the $500,000 post-explosion payment glowing on the screen. The board members shifted, their faces a mix of shock and disgust, their silence a death knell for Harold's defense. Emily's heart pounded, her hand brushing Daniel's, grounding them both. "He threatened me," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the room. "Tried to silence me to protect his lies, but we're done hiding." Her words were a vow, her eyes locking onto Harold's, unyielding. The boardroom pulsed with tension, the truth a guillotine poised to fall. Margaret Blackwell stood, her voice trembling but firm. "We need a vote. Harold's removal, effective immediately. Hands shot up, 9-3, Harold's allies shrinking under the weight of evidence. Harold lunged for the laptop, his hand scrambling to shut it down. But Daniel grabbed his arm, his grip iron. "You're finished," he said, his voice a quiet thunder. "Security's waiting." The door burst open, guards storming in, their hands on Harold's shoulders as he thrashed, his shouts echoing. "You'll regret this, Daniel." But his threats were hollow, his power shattered. Emily's chest heaved, her hand still clutching the USB, its secrets now a weapon that had brought him down. As Harold was dragged out, Daniel turned to Emily, his eyes clear, his hand finding hers. "I love you," he said, his voice soft but fierce, loud enough for the board to hear. "You gave me my sight back, my life back." Emily's heart swelled, her fingers squeezing his, her resolve a steel rod. The boardroom was silent, the weight of their bond undeniable. Victoria stepped forward, her face etched with remorse. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes on Emily. "For everything." The room felt electric, the truth a cleansing fire. Emily's sneakers stood firm, her heart a furnace of triumph and love. Harold was gone, but the board's eyes lingered, their judgment a storm yet to come. As Daniel's hand tightened around hers, Emily knew the fight wasn't over. The world would question their love, their victory. But she was ready. The USB drive, now empty of its secrets, was a symbol of their triumph, and the battle ahead would be fought together. "You're finished, Harold!" Daniel Whitaker's voice was a hammer, slamming through the Silicon Valley police station as Harold Grayson was led away in handcuffs, his wiry frame slumping under the weight of his crimes. Emily Harper stood beside Daniel, her sneakers rooted to the floor, her hand gripping his with a fierceness that matched the fire in her chest. Her jaw clenched, teeth grinding as she watched Harold's smirk dissolve, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. The USB drive's evidence, audio contracts, server logs, had buried him, proving he'd sabotaged the lab explosion that blinded Daniel for a $2 million Nexus Tech payoff. Justice was a blade, and it had finally struck. "You can't do this!" Harold shouted, his voice cracking as officers pulled him toward a holding cell. "I'm a Whitaker lawyer. I'm untouchable." But his words were hollow, drowned by the clang of metal doors. Emily's pulse steadied, her fingers tightening around Daniel's, her heart swelling with triumph. 8 years she'd fought for him, through darkness and doubt, and now Harold's betrayal was exposed, a crime that had stolen Daniel's sight and nearly broken them both. Her eyes locked onto Harold's retreating figure, her resolve a steel rod. He'd threatened her, tried to silence her, but she'd won. Victoria Whitaker stood nearby, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "I trusted him," she whispered, her voice raw with guilt, her earlier arrogance shattered by the boardroom reveal. She'd resigned as CFO hours ago, her letter a confession of her complicity in trusting Harold's lies. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, her eyes meeting his, now clear with restored vision. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hand squeezing Emily's. "You chose ambition over family," he said, his voice low, cutting. "But you can still make it right." Victoria nodded, her fingers twisting her purse strap, her remorse a heavy shadow. The board had acted swiftly, implementing new safety protocols to prevent another disaster, and their trust in Daniel's leadership was restored. Harold faced charges of corporate fraud and endangerment, his empire of deceit crumbling. Emily's chest heaved, her breath steadying as she felt the weight of justice settle. She'd faced Victoria's scorn, Harold's threats, and now stood victorious, her hand in Daniel's, their bond unbreakable. "It's over," she said, her voice firm, a vow to herself as much as to him. Daniel's eyes, seeing her clearly for the first time in years, softened. "Because of you," he said, his voice a quiet thunder. As Harold's shouts faded down the hall, Emily's heart pounded with a new rhythm, relief, pride, and a flicker of hope. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The world would judge their love, question her motives, but she was ready. Daniel's hand in hers was a shield, and the truth they'd uncovered was a beacon. Outside, the police station doors loomed, a gateway to a future they'd fight for together. But for now, Emily stood tall, her sneakers steady, her heart a furnace of defiance, ready for whatever came next. You don't get to rewrite the past with money. Emily Harper's voice sliced through the tense air of Whitaker Innovations' executive suite, her eyes blazing as she faced Daniel Whitaker. Her sneakers were planted firmly, her hand gripping the edge of his desk. The USB drive, now a symbol of their victory over Harold Grayson, tucked safely in her pocket. Daniel's restored vision caught every detail of her defiance, his heart pounding with awe for the woman who'd fought for him through 8 years of darkness. But her words weren't aimed at him. They targeted Victoria Whitaker, who stood clutching a proposal, her face etched with a guilt she couldn't shake. "I'm not rewriting anything," Victoria snapped, her voice sharp but trembling, her fingers crumpling the edges of the document. "I'm trying to fix what I broke." Her resignation as CFO still stung, a wound from the boardroom where Harold's betrayal was exposed, but her eyes burned with a new purpose. "Daniel, Emily, this is my plan. $75 million for a vision research fund, the Whitaker Vision Fund, to help others like you." She slid the proposal across the desk, her hands shaking, her earlier arrogance replaced by a desperate need for redemption. Emily's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she snatched the document, her pulse racing. She'd seen Victoria's cruelty, felt the sting of her boardroom humiliation. But this was different. The proposal outlined a foundation to fund stem cell therapies, inspired by Daniel's miraculous recovery. Emily's fingers tightened on the paper, her heart warring between skepticism and hope. "You think this erases what you did?" she said, her voice a blade cutting through Victoria's plea. "You called me a gold digger, tried to fire me. Now you want to play savior?" Victoria's face flushed, her nails biting into her palms. "I was wrong," she said, her voice cracking, raw with shame. "I trusted Harold, believed his lies about the explosion. I hurt you, Daniel, and I hurt Emily. This fund, it's not just money. It's my way of making amends." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, pleading for a chance. Daniel's hand brushed Emily's, grounding her, his voice low but firm. "She's trying, Emily. Let's hear her out." Emily's chest heaved, her anger a wildfire, but his touch steadied her, a reminder of the battles they'd won together. She flipped through the proposal, her eyes scanning the details. $75 million for clinical trials, partnerships with top neurologists, a focus on vision restoration for the underserved. Her mind flashed to Lily, the young girl at Allegheny General whose cataracts clouded her world. This could save her, save countless others. Emily's fingers paused, her heart softening, but her voice stayed sharp. "You're not running it," she said, her eyes locking onto Victoria's. "I am. With Daniel, we've earned it." Her words were a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. Victoria nodded, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Agreed," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "You're the heart of this, Emily. I'll step back." Daniel's eyes lit up, his hand squeezing Emily's, his pride in her a palpable force. "The Whitaker Vision Fund," he said, his voice a quiet thunder. "Co-directed by you, Emily. Your compassion, your fight, it's why I can see again." Emily's throat tightened, her fingers trembling as she set the proposal down, her resolve a steel rod. She'd spent years studying Daniel's condition, guiding him through therapy, and now her work could light the way for others. Victoria took a step forward, her hands unclenching. "There's more," she said, her voice steadying. "I'm starting a mentorship program for working-class women in tech. Inspired by you, Emily. I judged you by your background, but you're stronger than I'll ever be." Emily's eyes widened, her anger flickering, replaced by a grudging respect. Victoria's gesture was small compared to the fun, but it was real, a step toward dismantling the prejudice that had nearly broken them. Daniel stood, his movements sure, his vision catching every detail of the room. "We're doing this," he said, his voice a vow, his hand finding Emily's again. "For every person who's lost their light, for every family like yours, Emily." Her heart swelled, her fingers squeezing his, her mind flashing to her mother and sister in Pittsburgh, to the sacrifices that had brought her here. She'd fought for Daniel, for truth, and now she'd fight for others. "Let's make it happen," she said, her voice firm, a promise to the world. As Victoria left, her heels clicking softly, Emily and Daniel stood together, the proposal a blueprint for hope. The fun would change lives, but it was their bond, forged in darkness, tempered by truth, that would drive it. Emily's sneakers stood steady, her heart a furnace of purpose. The fight with Harold was over, but a new mission was beginning, one that would ripple beyond Silicon Valley. As Daniel's hand tightened around hers, the future loomed bright, but not without challenges. The world would watch, judge, but Emily was ready, her resolve a beacon, her love a shield, prepared to face whatever storms came next. "You saw me when I was invisible." Daniel Whitaker's voice was a quiet thunder, his words trembling with emotion as he leaned close to Emily Harper. Their first dance as husband and wife swaying to a soft melody in their Pittsburgh home. The small backyard, strung with fairy lights, hummed with the warmth of family and friends, but Emily's world narrowed to Daniel's eyes. Now clear, seeing her fully after 8 years of darkness. Her grandmother's altered wedding dress clung to her frame, the eye-shaped pendant he'd given her glinting against her chest. Her sneakers, swapped for heels tonight, pressed into the grass, her heart pounding with a joy so fierce it burned. Harold Grayson's betrayal was a fading scar, but this moment, her hand in Daniel's, their love declared, was a triumph that rewrote their story. "You were never invisible," Emily said, her voice a soft blade, cutting through the music, her fingers squeezing his as tears pricked her eyes. Her jaw clenched, not with anger but with a gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her. 8 years she'd guided him through blindness, through despair, through the secret stem cell trials that restored his sight. She'd faced Victoria's scorn, Harold's threats, and now stood here, married to the man who defied every odd. Her heart swelled, her pulse a steady drumbeat of love and pride. "You were always enough," she whispered, her voice breaking, her lips brushing his ear. Daniel's hand tightened around hers, his eyes catching hers with a clarity that still stole her breath. "You taught me that," he said, his voice raw, his steps steady as they moved together. "You saw me, Emily, when I was nothing but a broken man in a mansion. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." His words were a vow, each one landing like a spark, igniting her chest. The crowd, her mother Clara, her sister Lily, Victoria, and close friends, faded into a blur, their applause a distant hum. Emily's fingers traced the pendant, its tiny eye a symbol of their journey, her heart a furnace of love that had carried them through. The wedding was small, intimate, held in the backyard of their new Pittsburgh home, a modest house they'd bought to start fresh, away from the Silicon Valley spotlight. Clara stood nearby, her gnarled hands clapping, her eyes shining with pride for her daughter, who'd carried their family through sacrifice. Lily, now a college graduate, beamed, her nursing dreams sparked by Emily's strength. Victoria, her face softened by remorse, lingered at the edge, her presence a quiet olive branch. She'd reconciled with Daniel, her mentorship program for working-class women a testament to her change, inspired by Emily's unyielding spirit. Emily's chest tightened, her breath hitching as she saw the family they'd built. Not just hers and Daniel's, but a community healed by truth. The Whitaker Vision Fund, launched 3 months ago with $75 million, was already changing lives. Emily, co-director alongside Daniel, had overseen its first success, a young boy in Ohio regaining partial sight through their funded trials. Her mind flashed to the hospital, to the nights she'd studied vision therapies, to the moment Daniel first saw her outline, his voice trembling, "I see you, Emily." That memory fueled her, her resolve a steel rod as she pushed the fund forward, ensuring others found the light she'd helped Daniel reclaim. Her fingers brushed Daniel's arm, grounding her heart swelling with purpose. Victoria approached as the dance ended, her hands clutching a small gift, a leather-bound journal for Emily to document the fund's progress. "You were right," she said, her voice low, her eyes meeting Emily's without flinching. "I judged you, but you're the strongest person I know. Thank you for showing me what loyalty means." Emily's lips twitched, a half-smile breaking through her guarded heart. "You're learning," she said, her voice sharp but warm, her hand accepting the journal. Victoria nodded, her fingers trembling, her redemption a work in progress but real. Lily joined them, her nursing scrubs swapped for a dress, her eyes bright with excitement. I got into Pitt's nursing program, she said, her voice bubbling, her arms wrapping around Emily. Because of you. You showed me how to fight for what matters. Emily's throat tightened, her arms pulling Lily close, her heart aching with pride. She'd worked 2 jobs to put Lily through college, just as she'd fought for Daniel's hope. Now her sister's future was secure, a ripple of their victory over Harold's betrayal. Daniel pulled Emily back to the dance floor, his hand finding hers, his eyes catching the pendant's glint. This is us, he said, his voice soft, his fingers tracing the eye-shaped charm. You gave me my sight, but more than that, you gave me a reason to see. Emily's chest heaved, her breath catching as she pressed her forehead to his. You gave me a home, she whispered, her voice a vow, her heart a beacon. Their love wasn't just about his recovery, it was about seeing each other truly through every storm. The crowd cheered as they kissed, their bond a fire that had burned through prejudice, betrayal, and doubt. The Whitaker Vision Fund was making headlines, its trials promising hope to thousands. Medical journals praised Daniel's case, calling it a breakthrough, while human interest stories celebrated their love as proof that resilience could conquer anything. Emily's mother clapped louder, her weathered hands a testament to their family's strength. Victoria's mentorship program was gaining traction, empowering women like Emily to break barriers. And Lily's nursing journey was just beginning, inspired by the sister who'd never given up. As the music faded, Daniel and Emily stood together, their hands intertwined, their eyes locked. The fairy lights flickered, but their glow was nothing compared to the fire in their hearts. What do you see now? Emily asked, her voice soft, her lips curving into a smile. Daniel's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. You, he said, his voice a quiet thunder. Always you. Her heart swelled, her fingers squeezing his, her resolve a steel rod. They'd faced Harold's sabotage, Victoria's scorn, the world's judgment, and emerged stronger, their love a shield, their purpose a beacon. The night stretched on, but Emily's mind was already on tomorrow. The fund's next trial, Lily's first nursing class, the endless demands of a life built on hope. She'd carried Daniel through darkness, fought for truth, and now stood ready to face the future. As they stepped off the dance floor, hand in hand, the pendant gleamed against her chest, a symbol of their shared vision. The world would watch, question, but Emily was ready, her heart a furnace of love and determination. Their story wasn't just a happy ending, it was a beginning, a legacy of hope that would outlast them both, a light for anyone lost in the dark. This story of Emily and Daniel shows that true vision comes from love, trust, and seeing someone's worth beyond their circumstances. It's about resilience, defying prejudice, and finding light in the darkest moments. What's a time when someone's belief in you changed your life? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Stay inspired.